The air conditioners are 4 stories up on the roof, so it takes time to come down.
Okay.
The network line, we've got it.
I'm all hooked up.
We're hooked up, you're not plugged in.
No, I'm not hooked up.
Okay, that's what I mentioned.
Thanks. I'm good to go. Thanks.
You're good to go anytime you want.
All right. Great. Good afternoon, everyone. Glad to see so many people actually stayed the last day of the show. Speaking on the last day is always fun because you usually get 2 people staring at you from the back of the room. So I'm quite glad to see you all here and attending. Thank you. My name is JP Morgenthal. I'm the cloud evangelist for a company called Smartronics. Smartronics has been delivering actual solutions in the cloud for the federal government now for 3 years. We did recovery.gov, which was the transparency website for TARP funds, tracking them. And we have a federal community cloud we created for Treasury called treasury.gov and all the subsites that are under that. So actually running this stuff, managing it, hardening it, putting it in the cloud and on EC2, so it's running in a public cloud environment. So, you know, I always like to let people know that as you come to these events that there's real stuff going on here. And and real cloud applications that are being executed and run in a production manner. And so I'm going to make this real easy for everybody. And so they get the mouse over there. Okay. The photographer wants to take his picture. This is Fuad, for everyone who doesn't know Fuad. Fuad started this company back in, what, 1999 or?
94.
94.
Hi guys, thank you for coming.
And I know him since 97.
And retired for 2 years now.
What? And he's retired, that's right. Still coming around. It's like one of those owners that you sold the business and the guy still shows up to work every day. So another quick point, a general disclaimer about my images. I don't work for VMware. I don't prescribe VMware. Nothing wrong with the product. I'm just not an ad man or a pitch man for it. They have really cool icons that I found on the web. So if you see something that might indicate, you know, that they're, you know, the name of a company, it's really because I'm lazy and didn't want to seek out images with no logo branding on it. But I am not, you know, saying in any way, shape, or form that that's what you should use or what I use. So general disclaimer. So make it really easy. Okay. How do you get to the cloud? Step 1 is you virtualize, and then step 2 is you take your virtual machines and you put them in the cloud. And so it's really that easy. Nah. So this is my favorite slide. I get to be this guy, you know, Dogbert. But if it really was that easy, it'd be fantastic. And I gave a similar presentation at Interop a couple of weeks ago, actually over a month ago now. And one of the editors for Search Target Cloud was in the audience tweeting. And by the time I got done with this presentation, he said, if you thought cloud computing was going to be easy, at JP Morgenthal squashes your hopes like a grape. So, so what are the 6 steps? 1, seek to understand, and we'll obviously go into depth on each of these. Good with this now. Gives me something to do with my hands, otherwise I'm sitting there, yeah, exactly, swimming. Step 2 is identify a business use case. Step 3, develop your justification. And I always feel like step 2 and 3 is kind of like telling somebody open the door before you walk through it, but you'd be surprised how many people actually walk through the doors in the cloud computing area. Step 4, build and test your cloud. Step 5, migrate if necessary. And step 6, monitor and maintain. So, you've all been here for 3 days attending sessions. So being the tail end, it's not much fun to do the seek understanding section of the presentation because you probably have your mind just swimming in cloud education at this point. But you know, understanding what your options are in cloud computing is critical. I do like this slide to help really exemplify what the root of cloud computing is, because I think one area that even after a show like this, maybe more after a show like this, is there are so many different aspects to what people deem cloud computing to be, or what the value and the benefit of cloud computing is. And I'm sure you've heard a bunch of different opinions with regard to that so far this week. And I guess I'll preface that with, in my opinion, this is the main driver behind cloud computing for cloud computing benefits. And it's really around taking underutilized environments, and making them available in a easy to access network manner as a set of resources that you can then apply to whatever your tasks are in a much more simplified fashion and in a much more economical fashion. So reducing power, all these things eventually lead to the other higher level benefits. Having your files in cyberspace isn't a benefit. Having your files in cyberspace when your hard drive crashes is a benefit. So the whole concept of cloud and where it starts, what is the root? To me, this is really the root of understanding the value proposition. And because of this, there's a lot of things you can then do, right? Again, you've probably seen these terms multiple times. The only difference that I like to make when I discuss the different deployment models is that I differentiate private internal cloud with private external cloud. And the reason being is because we actually build private external clouds. So, and I believe that you're going to see that being a very popular model that really starts to get used more often. It offers kind of the best of both worlds. You don't own the data center anymore, you're not paying for the space, the power, the cooling, but you, with all the relative benefits of what you want your own data center for, control over the wire, make sure nobody else is in there, you're the only tenant, you're not sharing the apartment, it's your apartment, it's your house, but your house is inside my building. And so I have to believe that I differentiate that rather than just saying private cloud. Can't escape the fact, public cloud, that the one key benefit there is always going to be your low startup costs. But the downside is that you have to relinquish a lot of control over resource allocation. And as a group that's been monitoring and operating applications in the cloud now for 2 years, I can tell you that is many times not fun. And getting to the root cause of issues when the system is no longer available can be quite problematic, especially when you don't have visibility below a hypervisor layer anymore. So hybrid cloud, definitely we're going to see a lot of hybrid clouds form over time. I actually will discuss that a little further in the presentation. I actually recommend that model with regard to infrastructure. I'll explain that. And then the community cloud, oddly enough, is really a very popular model that I wouldn't have naturally expected to emerge so quickly. But the ability for a group of people with similar interests to be able to say, we're going to all share this, we're going to share the cost of the infrastructure and allocate it over the group as a whole, but be able to know that you're the only tenants in there, like the nice cloud that just was brought online recently, right? You don't have Foursquare going up to NICE saying, hey, can I put my stuff in your cloud? No, what's going in there is going to be, banks and brokerages who are running applications that will affect the trading networks. Okay, so that's a community cloud. It's designed specifically for, the trading marketplace. So this concept, the community cloud, seems to have a lot of interest, and it is growing very rapidly. The Hoff cloud model, which I had cleaned up because Chris isn't necessarily a good graphic artist, but he has good concepts, and this was initially put in the Cloud Security Alliance security paper that you can download off the CSA website, and basically just gives you an overview of the different types of models and the layers within each of the models. I imagine you might have seen something similar to that this week. So we will, again, it's important to understand what you have at your avail from a cloud computing standpoint before just jumping in. The key point there is don't manage by magazine and don't do cloud just because it sounds like fun. So we move on to step 2, which is identify a business use case. This is a list, it's not comprehensive, but of the most popular use cases that we've actually written to in proposals and statements of work so far to date. Number 1 is reduce costs. Clearly people want to leverage cloud computing to reduce overhead, take better advantage of their infrastructure while lowering the cost of operating it, so the total cost of ownership. The second one is scale out and scale up. Now, scale up, I think anybody who's been working in IT and building distributed applications like the web and before that client server understands scale up. Scale up is something that we typically do by throwing more hardware at the problem. But no matter how much money you have, no matter how much space you have, eventually you will reach a point of saturation. That point of saturation often comes usually before your wallet, beyond when you run out of money, or space, or power. So you typically don't see saturation points, but anybody who says I can scale infinitely up, hasn't ever really scaled infinitely up. But there comes a point where there's a trade-off, and the cost of being able to scale to a certain point becomes too expensive. And so what people tend to do is they scale to a point where they feel that a high percentage, 95, 98% of their application needs are met. But there's always that, it's always like today, where it's really hot outside, so we really stress the networks, the grid, the electric grid. Your house has air conditioning. It's typically designed for a 90-degree load day, which means that as long as it's 90 degrees or below, your air conditioning is running great. Once you get to 90 degrees and above, all of a sudden you start hearing the thing continually run. You get to 100, you start cursing the thing, because it was only designed for a peak load day, which was 90 degrees. Well, people do that with their data centers and their applications all the time. That's great. 95% of the time we're all getting our email, but we had those days where everybody logged on at the same time and system it becomes unavailable, you have backlog, or the servers becomes so laden with requests that it takes hours to recover. Those type of spikes are commonplace. So wouldn't it be great if we had the opportunity to say, when those spikes occur, I don't want to pay for hardware just to sit there and run once, twice, 3 times a year, right? But wouldn't it be great if I could just pull in some extra compute power or when I need it? And so that's where we start to get into scale out, and that's really another major promise of what cloud computing can do for us, is that we can have that available compute resources extended to us on a as-used basis without having to own that equipment and sitting around doing nothing the rest of the time. So we can do that, of course, around CPU, memory, disk space, and of course, big data and storage and analytics is another reason to scale out. When we want to actually look at, do high performance computing on data, nobody has petabytes of this space just sitting around waiting for somebody to do a quick analytics, or 1,000 CPUs just sitting around doing nothing, waiting for some project to be run or some numbers to be crunched. But there are times when we wish we had that, and so again, we can scale out to the cloud when we want to. Improve time to completion of overnight processing. When I put that up the first time I did this session, that caused a tweet. People are like, what? You're actually looking at real IT requirements? This is the cloud, darn it. I still run into clients all the time that have processes, batch processes that run overnight that don't finish by the next morning. You need anybody else like that in here? Anybody else? Okay, so here's a great opportunity to say, well, on those times where maybe something happened and we started the job late, or we know it's going to run over because it happens this time every month for some reason, scale out to the web, scale out to the cloud, and utilize, take those jobs and do what you can in the cloud. Bring it when it's done. Just bring it down and be able to finish on time. So that's something that I believe companies will start to look into over time. High performance computing in general, disaster recovery and continuity of operations. Most organizations that I speak to really don't like, or haven't to date, really done DR Coop properly. Which means that if you ask them, like, yeah, we did DR Coop, and then I ask them the hard question, okay, so if you have a disaster tomorrow, how sure are you that your business will continue to run? And they usually say something on the order of, I have no idea. Or I spoke to one person who told me, an insurance company, who said it would take us 4 days to get back online in the event of a disaster. And we know it'll take 4 days. And they're using outsourced backup and a cold site, and by the time they load all the information back up and they catch up the databases where they're, 4 days would have passed. And the reason why that is again, risk management decision, cost versus value. And I don't understand why management doesn't, of course, when those 4 days are gone and they didn't make money, then all of a sudden somebody's getting fired. But until that point, they don't want to spend the money. And so I would say they haven't done an appropriate justification or risk management identification. But cloud computing is making it less expensive and easier to actually do DR right. You can utilize the cloud as a source to have either a warm site or a hot site if you want, and be able to quickly transition from your data center into and have the cloud up and running and operational in a matter of hours at a very cost-effective price, because it's not running 24/7 unless you want it to be. It could be in a suspended state, just accumulating very minimal costs. And then when you turn it on in full, that's when you'll actually start to have to pay for it. And mobile and secure computing is, again, the ability to, you have exponentially large number of devices now hitting your network than never before. The same application, you used to have one client, now you have the laptop, you've got the desktop, you've got the iPad, and you've got the cell phone all hitting the same application. So you've just quadrupled the amount of clients that are now hitting the same application. Separating those boundaries out and having putting the access for the additional devices into a cloud environment makes it much scale more easily to respond to the needs of that environment. Case in point, if anybody follows my tweets knows that yesterday I was bitching because Cloud Expo was down again, and it's been up and down continually over a number of days, so I couldn't tweet. I had to actually go out to the front and get my cell phone on and then write my bitch tweet. But the reason being is because when they had, with the number of devices that are actually, being turned on and accessing the wireless here at one point, the first day they finally turned it on, 600 people hit the same access point at the same time and brought it down. It brought it to its knees. So there has to be a better way to manage the effective, access for all these devices, and that typically is another good use of the cloud. And we spoke about community cloud. So now that you understand what it is you want to do, and it's important to understand what is the value proposition. What do you really want to achieve with going to the cloud? Not just, again, do it because everyone else is doing it. I had people walk up to me here at the show saying, we know we're going to have to do it. I just had to ask, how do you know you're going to have to do it? Well, we're a small bank. We have to do it. We have to go to the cloud. I just, I giggled inside on the thought that somebody has to go to the cloud is, a bit ironic. Well, show me why, and that's where we get into the justification. So what do you want in your justification? Clearly you need to define what it is that you think you will be doing or with your cloud environment. Will you be moving all your applications to the cloud? Will you be using it for DR Will you scale out? What is it that you really are using the cloud for? And what are your expectations once you do that? Risk mitigation is a huge part of doing justification. And I would venture to guess that most people who are doing cloud computing today, and I'm not talking about just I went out in my data center and I got VMware and I loaded up a bunch of virtual machines. I'm talking about actually leveraging a self-service environment with thin provisioning and storage and everything that's distributed across multiple regional data centers that you don't necessarily own. There are a number of risks that need to be identified with regard to that. Clearly, the two most critical are security and reliability. How do you assess security of a cloud provider? They're going to tell you, we're very secure. Are you going to believe them? And how far are they willing to let you look under their covers in order for you to satisfy your desire and your need to sign off and say, yep, I believe that this facility is secure enough for me to use. And what is that level of security for your organization? I think a lot more organizations have security officers than ever before, but a number of companies don't have any real security people whatsoever working there. So who is the right person to assess whether a cloud provider is going to be able to support you or not? And reliability. This stuff's new. What kind of track record really have any company, any cloud service provider built up that they can say, yep, we've had 5 nines for 10 years and we've had a couple of outages and here's what they look like and these were the causes for the outage, and if there's an outage, here's some names of customers that were very happy with the way we handled the situation and we were accessible, and here's the phone number. Amazon went out recently, and they during the event, one of the key things they learned was, oh, we never expected our help desk to get so overwhelmed with the number of calls. So yes, they're fixing it now, but this is what happens when you get stuff in its infancy. There's a lot that hasn't been tested, even for the biggest of the bigs. So those are 2 key areas of, that you need to focus on and really should have a checklist of things that are important to you when putting together this justification. What are your cost comparisons for actually building and working in the cloud? What do your staffing resources need to look like? Does it go up or does it go down? I think that there are a number of people who believe that when you go to the cloud, staffing resources go down. How many people here actually believe they go up? Good answer. Sorry, wait till I raise my hand. Yeah, in many cases they go up because the first thing is you're not turning off. You're not turning this switch on and this switch off. You got 2 environments, and you need to manage both environments simultaneously. And the skill sets that you've built here on your to manage your data center are different than the skill sets that you need on the cloud. And we'll talk about that a little bit as we get to the build and test part, the whole section on that. What does it really cost to run your infrastructure? You own it. It's yours. Okay? You have a house. There's no mortgage on it. You paid it all down. Okay? And now you go, yeah, I really like that rental though. It's really sexy. I don't get it. You really need to analyze the cost of what you have versus the cost of what you want. And what does that mean to the organization? And that gets into the whole CapEx versus OpEx debate, which means, capital expenditure, I spent my money up front, that changes. It doesn't disappear, it becomes operational expenditures, which is great for commercial organizations who have to pay taxes and now has a tax write-off, where before they had to depreciate over time, except, that not everybody is, I love that, well, we have a tax write-off. Would you rather not pay the taxes at all? So, it's like, I always laugh at people who think, well, it's great to have a tax write-off. Yeah, it is, but it's even better to have all that extra money in your pocket. So, analyzing the spend is really important. And maintenance. What does maintenance mean in the cloud? Microsoft is now offering a program called Bring Your Own License. But you got to pay an additional fee now to use your license in the cloud. Okay? So things like licensing changes when you move to the cloud. What does that mean to you? How easy is it to patch 50,000 machine instances in the cloud? It's not easy, I can tell you that. It takes a lot of work. So understanding really financially what it means for your cloud environment versus your current environment, it might be very eye-opening when you're thinking, I got to move to the cloud. We're going to have to move to the cloud. And your service level agreement is uber critical. And I always tell people, don't let your lawyer write your SLA. Let your lawyer review your SLA, but IT needs to write the SLA. Why? Because you're the only ones that truly understand what your requirements are for the applications that will be running in the cloud. And you really need to think them through. I mean, you're offloading an entire set of critical resources to a third party. And what does it mean to your organization? What are your expectations? Sure, it's easy to say, we'd love 100% uptime. We never want to be down. But that's not reality, at least not in IT land. So what is how are you going to deal with those factors, and what are your expectations of the service provider when those resources are unavailable? Billing. As a group that is responsible for taking an aggregate bill from Amazon and having to break it out and charge back to customers, I can tell you, nobody out there has a really good billing system that breaks everything down to a very atomic level with a lot of transparency. Billing is one of the weakest areas of these service providers right now, and that's something you have to take into account, because how do you know what you get charged for? There are horror stories out there what people have been charged for in the cloud. It's like, bills, it's like the kid who the parents were too cheap to get the girl a texting plan, so they got a $4,000 phone bill, and it's like, yeah, I bet you would have paid that, you would have you pay that $4 extra surcharge for unlimited texting now, wouldn't you? Well, that's what happens out in the cloud. It's like, all right, who turned on the VM and left it running? We get a lot of that. It happens. People turn on a VM, they forget to shut it down. Guess what? You're accumulating costs. These are all things that need to be thought through. So the next thing is to build and test. And this is where things are starting to, I think, change a little in the industry. There was a natural inclination to have people who were very deep and very siloed in their skill sets. So you had your storage guy, you had your network guy, you had your server guy, right? Or gal. I mean, leave gals. And so, quite often the server person would say, I need 50 gigabytes for this application. And so the storage person would allocate, the 50 gig, and then say, okay, now you can, it's allocated to you, now you can, the operating system person can now link it into to the operating system via iSCSI. Storage person didn't do that. They just went into a command line and allocated 50 gig out of a SAN. That was their whole job. They managed the SAN. Well, what's happening now is the rise of this organization called the DevOps. And it stands for developer operators, and it's really a melding of skills where the the operations people, the sysadmins are now actually having greater understanding of the applications. They're programming and developing themselves. They're administrating, they're doing automation on the environment. So you start to see this, this consolidation of skills. Instead of having a lot of people who are very narrow and very deep, you have people who are broad in skill sets and not so deep. And so you have this skill shift going on, and this move to this, you know, the DevOps, and actually it requires less DevOps to run your environment, plus you get greater automation. And more importantly, if you're building applications, you know, you don't have this syndrome when developers build stuff, throw it over the wall to operations, and then when it breaks, they say, well, it worked on my PC. Because this time, they're the person who's now handling the call. It's like, you know, I used to work in a very big B2B provider, and it was cloud in a sense. And I watched over a period of time as the morning operations call got longer and more people started to have to be on this call. But the people who were never on a call, unless somebody actually dialed them up to get on a call, were the developers. And I always sat there wondering, and I was the chief architect, so I'm sitting there going, how come none of our guys are ever on our calls? I think we should start, and on the CTO didn't like it very much when I said this, but I said, I think our guys should have to be on that call too. Because I think if our guys had to be on that call from 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. every morning, that software would be a hell of a lot better quality. And so that's another thing that's coming out of this DevOps environment, is a closer association between development, QA, and operations. And it's creating a more agile environment, and it's creating a more higher quality product. The other aspect of building a test is to start thinking of delivering IT as a service. And I use the analogy of moving from being the landlord, or slumlord as I like to call them. So you're the slumlord, and you know somebody asks you for an email box, and you're like, you know, it's like, you know, being 12 degrees outside, it's snowing, and they're asking you for heat, and you're like, you know what? If I like you, I'll give you some heat. You know, that's what it's like. And if for some IT organization today, I need an email box. Maybe next week. I'll get you one. Don't worry. Try Gmail. So you're moving from the slumlord into what I call the concierge. You know, IT needs to start really thinking of themselves as the hotel concierge, where it's like, I have all these services. What would you like? How can I help you? How can I make your life easier? And if they don't, guess what? Amazon, Terramark, Rackspace, they're going to make their customers' lives easier while you're sitting on the unemployment line. And that is very much a reality over the next 10 years. So people in IT really start to need to change their mindset from, you know, that glass house and we own it to, you know, I'm here to service you. And now out of that, it means that you have to build infrastructure and be serious about it. And the reason I say serious about it, because that last point on there, the IDLE V3 one, I know a lot of organizations say they do IDLE. It's one guy in the corner that everyone laughs at. So, you know, part of IDLE is that there's processes that need to be followed and implemented and taken seriously. Governance models, understanding who's allowed to do what, you know, under what conditions will change be made, who can enact those changes. These are a lot of things that are not documented in many businesses. Policy management. Policy is not only internal, policy is external. If you're in healthcare, policy for you is HIPAA. If you're taking credit card numbers, PCI is policy for you. Understanding what impact do the policies that you need for your business have when you go to the cloud. Well, guess what? A lot of these organizations who came up with these wonderful acronyms can't even tell you what it means to be in the cloud. So you're going to be either waiting and not doing anything, or you're going to be driving these organizations to respond and clarify things for you as you go through it. And of course, the one that is often, you know, the redheaded stepchild of the family, enterprise architecture, because he's the other guy in the other corner that everyone laughs at, the enterprise architect. No one takes him seriously either. You know, this, in order to work, you have to understand your enterprise architecture. It's real easy when I have a room this big and a bunch of servers and everything's labeled nice, and if you were lucky, they actually run the wires neatly. Andy Man had a picture up the other day of some data center that looked like, a bomb just went off in it. I've seen those too, but if you're lucky and they actually have all the wires labeled and you know what apps are anyway, that's great. But when you start taking those pieces and saying, you're going to Amazon. You're going to Terramar. You, Rackspace. All of a sudden, not having an enterprise architecture becomes very painful to your organization. Knowing your assets, knowing where they are, knowing how they're connected, and knowing what's running where and how it's running is critical to cloud success. So, how are you gonna, so now you got your pretty sexy new cloud, and you've tested it, your DevOps guys are sitting back there, and you can go to them and they're like, I need 20 processes in 10 minutes, and they're like, no problem. But now comes the hard part, okay? You actually want to do something with this infrastructure. How are you going to move your apps there? So the first thing you have to decide, are we going to do lift and drop, which basically means I'm going to take the current environment the way it is, inclusive of all the networking and addressing and memory configuration, and I'm just going to try to execute it in this new environment, which can work, may not. 9 times out of 10, probably have a hiccup. Or are you going to redevelop it, which is expensive, but you get to take advantage of these new platforms as a service. You get to think about how you're actually going to handle things in a much more scalable manner. Most people, unfortunately, don't have the additional funds to go and think through redevelopment. But if you're running, an application that's kind of been on its last legs anyway, great opportunity to turn to the boss and say, hey, how about we redevelop that app on that new cloud thing? But again, back to the justification, this also should be looked at up front as part of your goals. If you're saying, we need to, as part of our going to the cloud, we're going to move these applications into the cloud. What does it mean for these applications, which now run on their own server, to now be sitting on another server as a co-tenant with a bunch of other applications that they've never run with? An interesting point that a lot of people don't know is that, that there really isn't a system of controlled quotas that is implemented between tenants. So for most of these virtualization environments, it is possible for one of them to be a resource pig at some level. I just wrote a blog last week or the week before about how when we talk about multi-tenancy, we mean the network too. So I got one wire that's coming into the back of that physical server that I just chopped up into 100 virtual machines. Well, they all share that same network, and it's very easy to do a denial of service attack on some of the other tenants by taking out the network. So even if I have the ability to say this tenant's only getting this much CPU power and he's only getting this much disk, and I'm going to control, how they utilize that so that they don't start to act as a resource hog. Well, they can, at the end of the day, a single client that's coming in to access one of those tenants can take out all the other tenants with it. So thinking through multi-tenancy and what that means to to the other applications that will be running on that box are something that needs to be thought of. And then you have your data residency requirements. Do I have data that must live in a particular place? Like, federal government can't just decide to put its data on a data center in Libya. I don't think that would be a very good idea right now. So you actually have requirements about where data is allowed to live. Well, how do you control that? When you have a service provider who says, we have 12 data centers around the world, and we'll make sure you get 5 nines performance, but we got to control everything. We may move your machines around, we may move your data around. That's how, the fact that we actually own these pools and know how to control and utilize these pools is where we get our economies of scale. So you start, holding their feet to the fire and say, yeah, well, my data is not allowed to go over to Europe, or it's not allowed to go to South America, so you can't use those data centers. You're now limiting how well they can effectively utilize their data centers. and their cloud infrastructure. Which you get to, design-wise, the outcome of that is something like what you see at Amazon, and I think Rackspace says something similar, the concept of these resource zones, availability zones. I actually pick the data center that I'm running at, and if I do fail over, I pick the data center that I fail over to. So they really aren't, leveraging their infrastructure for maximum gain, which eventually is going to make it very hard in a commodity environment to bring costs down as low as they can possibly go. Although I think they're doing a pretty good job right now cost-wise. I think I did an analysis and it's still, I think you could end up paying like, for a medium-sized server running 24/7 for a year, it's like 10 grand. It's like, yeah. I guess when you add in all the cooling and air conditioning and overhead maintenance, that's pretty good. It's still a lot of money. 10 grand for one server. And then if you go to a large size, you can get up to 40, 50 grand. So, thinking these issues through and how the data center, the cloud service providers are going to respond to them and what they're going to offer you are critical for you to understand as you begin to think about migrating your applications. I got 3 minutes. And then the last steps. Cybersecurity. How are you going to secure your environment? Okay, a lot of these cybersecurity tools work real great as an appliance. Why do they work real great as an appliance? Because they have ASICs in them that do special code. And if they do have a cloud version, it doesn't have those ASICs, so they don't run as quickly. And by the way, most environments in the cloud, most virtual machines in the cloud, don't allow you to put the network into promiscuous mode, so you really can't be sniffing traffic easily. So thinking about how you're going to manage, this is now a partnership between you and the cloud service provider to think about how cybersecurity is going to get done in your cloud environment and around your applications. Performance management becomes an issue. Again, you don't have insight below a hypervisor. So how do you know whether it's your app that's impacted, whether it's other tenants that are impacting you, or whether it's as we've seen, the hypervisor code that's impacting you, or the hardware? How are you going to do patching of your systems and your operating systems? As you start to proliferate and have, sprawl, virtual machine sprawl. How are you going to implement change management in the cloud so that, you don't just impact your clients? I think, there's a trend now that features just appear. You use Salesforce. Oh, that is a new feature. Well, how did that get in there? No blast the month before saying, hey, we're going to be implementing a new feature. It's going to start on this date. These are the potential impacts. No, it just pops up there. And if it all of a sudden causes problems, well, all right, well, we better back that out. So, change management philosophies are really becoming, chicken. I hate to use the word changing, but I have to. Changing with the concept of cloud and software as a service. And then, how are you going to do your backup and for your DR and your COOP? Used to be you backed up your data. Now you think about, instead of backing up just your data, you have to back up your machine images. And how is that all being managed? And if you don't use dedupe, you're effectively backing up the same. 95% of most virtual machines are similar across a number of virtual machines as well as over time. So without some sort of deduplication, you're just spending a lot of money on redundant pieces of data. All things to think of as you begin to get through monitor and maintaining. So that's pretty much the 6 steps. Questions? Anyone have a question? No questions? All right. Well, we got pictures. No questions. Well, thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of the show.
Excellent, thank you. Thank you, Carl. And you folks provide the bridges to the ability to do something?
We are a cloud system integrator. We don't have infrastructure.
Understood.
Okay.
We're looking into the cloud, taking on, the radio folks.
We
strategy, cloud architecture.
Let's go from 0 to,
Yeah, we actually monitor and maintain the cloud. Yeah, we will operate the cloud. And I know.
it was great, thank you.
Enjoyed it.
Your first name is,
JP. Thanks, Al.
thank you very much.
My pleasure. Good meeting you. We can shut, just close it.